Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Kremlin has rejected European proposals on possible security guarantees for Ukraine, insisting that any plan must exclude Western or NATO troops from Ukrainian soil. Moscow has also stated that it views ongoing public discussions on the issue as unhelpful. Moscow has downplayed prospects of an imminent peace summit, stating that any meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky must be well prepared to be effective. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has added that negotiators remain in contact, but no date for talks has been set. US President Donald Trump's steep 50% tariffs on Indian goods have come to force weeks after Washington slapped an additional 25% penalty over New Delhi's Russian oil and arms purchases. The move puts India amongst the world's most heavily targeted economies. Denmark has summoned the US chargé d'affaires in Copenhagen after accusing Washington of attempting to interfere in Greenland's affairs. The Danish foreign minister stated that any external meddling in the kingdom's internal matters is unacceptable, stressing close cooperation with Greenland's government. China's foreign ministry has dismissed calls for it to join US and Russia nuclear disarmament talks, calling such demands neither reasonable nor realistic. Beijing maintains that responsibility for arms reductions lies primarily with Washington and Moscow. The IDF claims that the double-tap strike on Al-Nasser hospital in Gaza, which killed at least 20 people, was aimed at a camera positioned by Hamas. Now, in response, Hamas has slammed the IDF report as baseless. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Israel on the day of disruption. The families of hostages are staging protests in front of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has emphasized on continued offensive in Gaza until the end of Hamas. US President Donald Trump is set to chair a meeting on Gaza at the White House later today. Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar will also be in Washington, and a discussion on post-war plans for Gaza is expected. All right, viewers, those were the headlines, and our top focus remains what is transpiring in the Middle East. Now, Hamas has denied that any of the Palestinians killed in Israel's 25th August attack on Gaza's Al-Nasser hospital were militants. This is claimed by the Israeli military. Now, in a statement, Hamas has stated that one of the individuals Israel had identified as a militant was actually killed in Al-Mawasi, some distance from the hospital, while another was reportedly killed elsewhere at a different time. This comes after the Israeli Defense Forces released the findings of an initial inquiry into the hospital strike, which stated that 6 militants were amongst those targeted, leaving at least 20 people dead, including 5 journalists. Israel has also claimed that it identified a camera allegedly positioned by Hamas in the area, reportedly used to observe Israeli forces. However, Hamas has called the claim as baseless. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. A lot of politically charged developments taking place within Israel. Meanwhile, we now know that Hamas has reacted to the IDF's initial report. In its report, the IDF has stated that although it deeply regretted the mishap that had taken place, there were 6 militants that were in fact neutralized at the strike location. Hamas has now countered this, arguing that they were not neutralized at the location but some distance away. how will Israel proceed from here? Because there's a lot of pressure that is mounting domestically. There's a lot of pressure that is also mounting internationally.
You know, the domestic pressure or international pressure up to now really doesn't change how Netanyahu orders the IDF to conduct the war. Now, some of the international pressure over the past 3 months or so with regard to the starvation and humanitarian situation has prompted Netanyahu to allow more aid into Gaza. But when it comes to how the IDF is going to conduct the war, these kinds of incidents that might be in dispute or where journalists have been killed, and it's not the first time journalists have been killed, clearly it does, clearly it does not affect Netanyahu's decision making. And I would not expect these recent days fighting or disputes about where the militants were killed is going to have any change on Israeli military decisions.
All right, I request you to stay on with us. There's more news coming in. We're now learning that the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Leo XIV, has made a strong appeal to the global community to end the nearly 2-year conflict between Israel and Hamas. Now, speaking during his weekly audience at the Vatican, the pontiff called for permanent ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and unimpeded access for humanitarian aid. The Pope has also called for full respect of the international humanitarian law in addressing the crisis. Let's in fact listen in to what he had to say.
Che insegna ai suoi discepoli il Padre nostro. Seguo con molta preoccupazione la gravissima situazione umanitaria a Gaza, dove la popolazione civile è schiacciata dalla fame e continua ad essere esposta a violenze e morte. Rinnovo il mio accorato appello al cessate il fuoco, alla liberazione degli ostaggi e al rispetto integrale del diritto umanitario.
All right, there, viewers, you've heard what exactly the Pope has said. His message for peace on humanitarian grounds. Still with us on the broadcast is Rose Feingold, political analyst. I'd like to rope you in. As far as these appeals are concerned, that we've also seen families of hostages, those protesting in the streets. They've called for an end to the hostilities. They've asked Netanyahu to secure a ceasefire deal so that the hostages who still remain in Hamas's captivity are not harmed. Do you think Netanyahu will buckle under this pressure?
Up to now, he hasn't. There's been consistent protests by relatives of the hostages, as well as large numbers of the Israeli public who disagree with how Netanyahu is conducting the war, and they want a ceasefire to be reached. So this has been an ongoing domestic political fracture in Israel, but it hasn't stopped Netanyahu from conducting the war in the way that he wants to, and his stated goal is to defeat Hamas militarily. Now, there is another option here, and we often talk about this here on NewsX, and that other option is simply for Hamas to surrender. Hamas cannot win this war. Now, they seem intent on fighting to the last man and the last round of ammunition, but if they keep doing that, it's just going to result in the death of more civilians, regardless of what happens to the Israeli hostages that they still hold. So the option is there for Hamas to surrender and bring this war to an end.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us. There are more developments that we are tracking from the Middle East. We're now learning that 2 U.S. senators have condemned settler violence, as they claim, in the West Bank after visiting a church targeted in recent attacks. Chris Van Hollen and Jeff Merkley have toured the Church of St. George in Taipei, which is a site that was allegedly assaulted by Israeli settlers, as they claim, in July. The senators called the violence against Palestinians unacceptable, with Van Hollen accusing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government of being complicit in allowing the attacks to continue. Listen in to what they've said.
Well, we're here overall because we want to focus on the really terrible situation throughout this area, including the war in Gaza. And one of our messages, we need to end the war in Gaza and bring the hostages home. But we also need to end this continued settler violence on the West Bank, which people here in this town of Taipei witnessed and experienced firsthand.
Meanwhile, Christian leaders had earlier warned of rising assaults on sacred sites, stating that it was driving believers to leave the West Bank. Rights groups report violence has escalated since the Israel-Hamas war began in 2023. Currently, 700,000 Israelis live among 2.7 million Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, areas that Palestinians seek for a future state. Ross Feingold still with us on the broadcast. We've heard the statement that the US Senator has had to give. It's an interesting development because we've seen the United States administration, whether it was under Joe Biden earlier, the Democrats, or even Donald Trump right now, standing resolutely in support of Israel, in support of Netanyahu's actions. But at the same time, now we're seeing voices from within the US, senators no less, coming out and making these statements. What do you make of this?
The reality is there's not much to be made of this for the simple reason that these are two Democratic senators. They're in the minority. The Republicans have the majority in the Senate. They have the majority in the House, and they control the White House. So the opinions or the criticism from two Democratic senators is going to have zero effect on Netanyahu, and it's certainly going to have zero effect on the Trump administration's support for Israel. So it's certainly the right of these senators to travel there, and it is certainly the right of these senators to make those criticisms, but practically this is going to have zero effect.
Another interesting development that's happening is that Donald Trump is going to be chairing a very crucial meeting very, very shortly. Apart from this, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is slated to meet Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar in Washington as well. What are your expectations from these meetings? What do you think will catalyze?
The policy of the Trump administration since it took office in January has generally been supportive of Israel. Now, there were times when Trump has publicly called on Netanyahu to allow in more aid, for example, and I'm sure Trump gets some very direct messages from Arab countries that are friendly with the Trump administration, but which are very critical of Israel. So Trump hears that side as well. But when it comes to how Israel conducts the war or resupplying Israel's military, or being critical of both Hamas as well as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, the Trump administration is generally very supportive of Netanyahu. So I don't think that's really going to change. So when Rubio meets Gideon Sa'ar, I think we'll hear very positive statements from Secretary of State Rubio about U.S.-Israel relations and U.S. support for Israel.
All right, a quick follow-up to that as well. Speaking of the United States, they've stated that they're looking at making sure that Lebanon presents a plan in order to disarm the Hezbollah, something that Hezbollah has outrightly rejected. Where do you think this particular aspect of the tensions in the Middle East will head to next?
That's a really good question. Israel did fight a war with Hezbollah, which frankly Israel won. Hezbollah was defeated. They are significantly militarily weakened. They've lost the conduit through Syria that previously existed, where weapons could flow through Syria onto Hezbollah in Lebanon. That option is no longer available. And it's the policy of the Lebanese government that there should be one army in the country, the National Army of Lebanon, and that Hezbollah cannot continue to act as an armed state within a state. That doesn't mean Lebanon, the current government of Lebanon, wants peace with Israel or to negotiate with Israel, but they do have a joint goal, which is that Hezbollah needs to disarm. So it's up to the president and the prime minister of Lebanon, how eager are they willing to go? Are they willing to fight Hezbollah over this, or are they going to give up and allow Hezbollah to continue to be an armed state within a state? So it's very interesting to watch. Obviously, there's U.S. Pressure on Lebanon to take more action to disarm Hezbollah, and we simply don't know how that's going to play out. But as you said, at the moment, Hezbollah is refusing to give up its weapons.
All right, Mr. Feingold, thank you so much for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. We will continue to track developments from the Middle East, but meanwhile, we're shifting our focus to another war zone. Yes, I'm referring to the Russia-Ukraine war. We're now learning that the Kremlin has expressed strong opposition to Western involvement in any future security guarantees for Ukraine. Spokespersons have emphasized that there should be no Western or NATO troops on Ukrainian soil, rejecting recent European proposals outright and stating that public discussion of such guarantees are not helpful. Moscow also downplayed the effectiveness of her current discussions, stating that high-level meetings must be carefully prepared in order to be productive. While Kremlin officials acknowledged ongoing contact between the chiefs of the negotiating groups, they've maintained a skeptical stance on the direction of Western-led peace efforts. Now, despite all this, the Kremlin has noted that U.S. efforts to find a peaceful solution remain important and could play a role in ending what it described as a long-standing conflict. We've, of course, seen outreach by U.S. President Donald Trump. He had earlier met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, although that did not result in any ceasefire deal. It was, as many experts would say, being viewed as an olive branch by the American administration in order to secure a peace deal between Moscow and Kiev. Following this, there was a high-stakes meeting that was held at the Oval Office. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived with NATO allies, leaders from NATO countries in a show of strength, the optics of which we all saw later. But there was a lot of discussion about security guarantees for Ukraine. Trump has ruled out sending boots on the ground, but aerial support has not yet been ruled out. There's been a lot of discussion, reports coming in that Budapest was apparently chosen and was being eyed as one of the sites for a trilateral discussion that was proposed by Donald Trump. However, the Ukrainians were not comfortable with this, and this was something that Zelensky personally came out and challenged. Meanwhile, the Kremlin was initially receptive, but considering the rhetoric over the last couple of days, they have now expressed strong opposition to Western involvement in any future security guarantees for Ukraine. We do know that European powers will be footing the bill in order to purchase American weapons to secure Ukraine and Ukraine's frontiers and Ukrainian soil. But in the meantime, Russia's primary concern remains as to whether Ukraine would be a part of NATO or not. That is something that is non-negotiable for Moscow, something that Putin has highlighted with Trump as well. Meanwhile, this is, of course, the latest that we're tracking. We're now learning that the Kremlin has expressed strong opposition to Western involvement in any future security guarantees in Ukraine. We're also learning now that the Kremlin has confirmed that a meaningful and necessary conversation took place between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump during their recent meeting in Alaska. While Ukraine was discussed, Russian officials stated they do not consider it helpful to share details publicly without context. The summit was framed as a part of a broader diplomatic effort, though no concrete agreements have been announced. Kremlin sources added that Russia continues to prepare for President Putin's upcoming unprecedented visit to China and confirmed that he will also be in Vladivostok on the 5th of September. So crucial details are coming in as far as the Trump-Putin summit, and disclosures regarding this are concerned. Of course, the whole world's eyes were contained on Alaska when this particular meeting had transpired. There was no concrete deal as far as a ceasefire is concerned that was inked. Putin did, in fact, while addressing the media with Trump, propose that Trump fly down to Moscow in order to meet him for a bilateral. Trump, on the other hand, proposed a possible trilateral between Putin himself and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A lot of murmur which we've been seeing over the last couple of days. Of course, the summit was framed as a broader diplomatic effort, though no concrete agreements had been announced. Kremlin sources added that Russia continues to prepare for Putin's upcoming unprecedented visit to China. He will be in Shenzhen on the 31st of August and the 1st of September for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, will be rolling out the red carpet. That's not all. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be present in Shenzhen. And there's been a lot of talk, a lot of murmur about a possible Russia-India-China axis over the last couple of weeks, ever since America imposed 50% tariffs against India for buying Russian oil. America claims that India is footing the bill for this war. Meanwhile, as far as the Trump-Putin summit is concerned, Kremlin has made it very clear that meaningful and necessary conversation took place between President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus towards other crucial developments coming in, China has now rejected calls to join possible nuclear arms reduction talks with the United States and Russia. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gu Jiaqun has now told reporters that the nuclear arsenals and security environments of the three nations are fundamentally different. He said that it is neither reasonable nor realistic to expect Beijing to enter trilateral negotiations. Who underlined that China will continue its self-defense nuclear strategy and also maintain its no first use policy as well. He has added that Beijing's stockpile has in fact will remain at the minimum level required for national security even as it modernizes its forces.
中美核力量根本不在一个量级，两国核政策、战略安全环境也完全不同。要求中方加入中美俄三边核裁军谈判，既不合理也不现实。拥有最大核武库的国家应该切实履行核裁军特殊优先责任，进一步大幅实质削减核武库，为最终实现全面彻底核裁军创造条件。不首先使用核武器政策，坚持自卫防御核战略，始终将自身核力量维持在国家安全需要的最低水平，不与任何国家搞军备竞赛。中国核力量及核政策是对世界和平的重要贡献。
All right, this is of course the latest reaction from China. At the moment, China has outrightly rejected calls to join possible nuclear arms reduction talks with Russia. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gu Jiaqun has told reporters that the nuclear arsenal and security environments of the three nations are fundamentally different, and it is neither reasonable nor realistic to expect Beijing to enter trilateral negotiations. This, of course, comes as he has underlined Beijing's strategy to maintain a minimum limit of their stockpile as well as their no first use policy. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast is Major Mohammad Ali Shah. He's a defense expert joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. Interesting push by the Trump administration at a time even as war is raging on in the Middle East as well as between Russia and Ukraine. We do know that the lion's share of the world's nuclear arsenal is with Russia and the United States of America, and China's nuclear stockpile dwarfs in comparison What exactly is America's aim over here? Because China and even India, for that matter, both countries have a no first use policy. Meanwhile, both Russia and America, who are engaging in these nuclear disarmament talks, do not have such a policy.
Right, that's a very good question. At the moment, I see America with the leadership of President Donald Trump. I think he probably is unsure of what he's doing. Sometimes he decides something, takes a U-turn, he's something, does something else. I mean, if you to be a dictator with all the same thing, be Kim Jong-un in North Korea, he does what he does. I mean, President Trump is, I don't know what perhaps the intention could be that he's aiming for a Nobel Peace Prize, perhaps. Because when he came into power, he said, if he comes into power, he will ensure that all the wars in the world end, which meant Russia, Ukraine, which meant Palestine in a way. So it is, I really don't think that, that America will be able to achieve their objective. If that is the leadership, if that's the way it goes, they would not be. They just not be. Yes.
Indeed, and what's interesting is that this all comes even as the Russia-Ukraine war in particular is raging. Kremlin has now come out and expressed strong opposition to Western involvement, any future security guarantees for Ukraine. How do you react to this?
Okay, President Donald Trump, in fact, he had a meeting with the President Putin. And of course, they decided on some answer. He was hinting initially towards land, towards a deal which would mean Russia would claim Ukraine's land. And but again, so far we have a big high-up meeting. We have seen anything just on ground happening as yet. And President Zelensky was kept to the meeting. Rather, President Zelensky went to America was, say, humiliating for President Zelensky, the way President Trump had behaved with him. The video was very violent. There was much about what was going on. So President Trump, sometimes, he's imposing tariffs, sometimes he's doing this, sometimes he's handcuffing people and sending guns to the factory. I don't know what leader, teacher of America, the value of American, they told the economy in dollars. He is at one time sending money to IMF sending to Pakistan. On the other hand, failed last year get in America. So with all these signs around, I think America, if they would be having good intention, they would not succeed in irrespective because of the leadership they have. That's what I feel.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further developments that are now coming in. The European Union plans to fast-track legislation by week's end to eliminate all tariffs on U.S. industrial goods. A demand made by U.S. President Donald Trump before the U.S. will lower its duties on the bloc's automobile exports. Now, according to reports, the European Commission responsible for EU trade policy is expected to offer preferential tariff rates on select seafood and agricultural products. The EU has acknowledged that the trade deal reached with Trump favors the US but maintains that the agreement is essential to provide businesses with stability and certainty. The move comes despite Trump's threats to impose tariffs and other penalties on countries that tax online services without naming any specific nations or clarifying if the EU would be included. Trump has consistently criticized EU tech and antitrust rules targeting US tech giants like Alphabet, Inc., Google and Apple as well. EU cars and auto parts currently face a 27.5% tariffs on exports to the US, although the US and the European Union reached a trade deal to reduce American tariffs on most European products to 15%. Still with us on the broadcast is Major Mohammad Ali Shah. He's a defense and strategic expert. The timing of this deal is really, really interesting. It comes just as Europe has agreed to foot the bill for purchase of American arms for guaranteeing the security of Ukraine.
Right. See, America has been, people say that they've been helping Ukraine, the letter helping Ukraine. But if you see the larger picture, who benefits from this? It's whose arms are being sold. America. They've got a very easy customer with them. They are making profits for them. They're using Ukraine as a shield to attack against Russia. It's very simple. So it is a war between Russia and America, I would say that, and whereas America has been using Ukraine very simply. And now Ukraine, they come so far that you enter into war. It's easier, but very difficult to backtrack or to close it, or to ask for a ceasefire, or to ask for peace. As Karl Marx once said, if you want peace, be prepared for war. So, but that means President Donald Trump right now at the moment, I don't see much happening on ground apart from his desire of trying to get a Nobel Prize. He even tweeted this sometime, but have so many war world happened, but so far no one has considered it for a Nobel Peace Prize. So yes, with this deal, I see that ultimately who's going to benefit from America? Who is going to ultimately? Ukraine has both brunt of getting. How many of their soldiers have got killed? In fact, Russia also their soldiers have killed. Their civilians have got killed. But it's America, which is very smart, has not placed boots on the ground. In a way, they are seeing what's going on, and they are just having no what I'm saying.
All right, so thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us live on NewsX World. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus towards the Korean peninsula. US and South Korean troops have carried out a wet gap crossing exercise in Yeoju, a city southeast of Seoul, as part of their annual Ulchi Freedom Shield drills. About 300 personnel from both militaries took part in the operation, which included installing a 280-meter floating bridge across the Namhan River. The exercise, which kicked off on the 18th of August, is designed to strengthen river crossing capabilities and improve how the two forces work together. Let's listen in to what the battalion commanders from both sides have had to say.
Today's training highlights the U.S.-ROKA relationship and the strengthening of our alliance. This wet gap crossing is one of the most complex engineering missions we do. And we've done it today in a realistic combat environment. I appreciate my partners with the ROKA, the 7th Engineer Brigade, for coming out here, partnering with us.
양국 간의 도하 작전 능력 향상, 한미연합 지휘 통제 능력, 그리고 최초로 시도되는 한미연합 정비 훈련을 통한 성과를 극대화할 수 있었던 매우 귀중한 경험이 되었으며, 어떠한 작전과 환경에서도 우리 한미는 강의 양 끝에서 한국과 미군의 교전을 연결하는 완벽한 도하 작전을 성공할 수 있다는 자신감이 생겼습니다.
The Ulchi Freedom Shield continues till the 28th of August and is an 11-day annual drill aimed at boosting combined defense against regional threats. This, of course, comes as North Korean militarization continues to be ramped up under Kim Jong-un. Well, viewers, this is all we have time for. We will continue to bring more developments from across the world. Stay tuned for more on NewsX World.